Welcome to my channel, Africo Tales. Let's continue the story where we left off. In the aftermath of the battle, as the city tried to comprehend what they had witnessed, Baba Tembo arrived with the morning mist. The ancient master moved through the crowds with the dignity of one who has walked with spirits, his presence bringing calm to chaos like still water poured over flames. He embraced his 3 students with pride that transcended words, then knelt before Amara and Jengo with the reverence due to royalty. For these were no ordinary mother and daughter. They were the living embodiment of an ancient bloodline that stretched back to the first kings who had learned to speak with the rain. The master's words revealed truths that reshaped everything the family thought they knew about themselves. 7 years ago, Amara had given birth not to 1 daughter, but to 4 children, quadruplets whose combined power was prophesied to either heal or destroy the world. The birth had been attended by signs and portents that terrified those who still remembered the old stories. A corrupt sorcerer, fearing what these children might become, had stolen the 3 boys and ordered them drowned in the river. Only Baba Tembo's intervention had saved their lives, and he had spent 7 years preparing them for this moment of reunion. But the prophecy was not yet complete. The children's true test lay ahead, for dark forces greater than mere debt collectors had begun to stir in the deepest places of the earth. An ancient evil sealed away by the combined songs of 100 generations was beginning to wake. Only the pure voices of the reunited family, singing in perfect harmony, had the power to renew the bonds that kept this darkness chained. The family's personal struggles had been merely the first movement in a symphony of destiny that would determine the fate of every living thing under the African sky. Deep beneath the Kalahari Desert, in caverns that predated human memory, something that should have remained dead stirred in its prison of crystallized song. MALAIKA the Soul-Eater had been bound there since the dawn of civilization, when the first shamans had sacrificed their lives to cage the darkness that threatened to devour all light from the world. For millennia, the creature had slept, its malevolent dreams seeping up through the earth to poison the hearts of men and turn brother against brother. But now, as the modern world forgot the old ways and the songs of binding grew weak, cracks had begun to appear in its prison walls. The creature's awakening sent ripples through the spiritual realm that every gifted child in Africa felt like ice in their veins. In the great cities and tiny villages, in the depths of jungles and on the highest mountain peaks, sensitive souls turned toward the south with expressions of mounting horror. Ancient artifacts, long thought to be mere curiosities, began to glow with warning light. Sacred groves withered overnight. Rivers ran backwards. Animals fled in great migrations as if fleeing from a predator too terrible to name. Amara felt the darkness calling her name with a voice like grinding bones, tasting her power across the vast distances and finding it sweet. Her dreams became nightmares of endless caverns filled with the screams of the devoured, and she would wake with tears of blood staining her cheeks. The 4 children, their bonds still fragile from years of separation, struggled to understand the weight of destiny that now rested upon their young shoulders. Baba Tembo spoke of the trials that lay ahead with the gravity of a judge pronouncing sentence. They would have to journey to the very heart of the desert, descend into the demon's lair, and sing the binding song with perfect unity, or watch as everything they loved was consumed by hungry darkness. Word of the awakening darkness spread along the ancient paths of communication that connected every tribe and kingdom across the continent. From the proud Maasai warriors of the east to the wise griots of the western kingdoms, from the mountain peoples of the north to the coastal fishermen of the south, representatives began to converge on a neutral meeting ground, the sacred baobab of speaking truths, a tree so vast and ancient that entire villages could shelter beneath its branches. This emergency gathering had not occurred in over 500 years, not since the last time an existential threat had endangered all of Africa. The representatives who came were unlike any assembly the world had ever seen. There were kings whose lineages traced back to gods, shamans who could speak with the voices of animals, warriors whose scars told stories of battles against creatures that existed only in nightmares, and wise women whose eyes held the accumulated wisdom of centuries. They came in caravans that stretched across the horizon, bringing with them artifacts of power that had been hidden in secret places since before the coming of the first European ships. The very air around the great tree shimmered with accumulated magic as these guardians of ancient knowledge shared their most closely guarded secrets. When the full extent of the threat became clear, a silence fell over the gathering that seemed to stretch to the very edges of the world. MALAIKA the Soul-Eater was not merely a demon, but a force of absolute negation, a creature that existed to unmake the very concept of life itself. It could not be killed, only contained, and the previous binding had required the sacrifice of every master singer of that generation. Now, as the modern world forgot the old songs and few remained who even remembered the proper words, the burden would fall upon 5 voices, a mother and her 4 children who had been reunited by chance, but would need to sing with the unity of souls bound by destiny. The weight of their decision would determine whether the sun would continue to rise or whether eternal darkness would swallow the world. The journey to the demon's prison would take them through the most treacherous landscape on the continent, the desert of forgotten dreams, where the bones of failed heroes lay bleaching under an unforgiving sun. This was a place where water was more precious than gold, where mirages took the forms of lost loved ones, calling travelers to their doom, and where the very sand was said to remember every drop of blood that had ever been spilled upon it. No ordinary caravan could survive the crossing, but Amara and her children were far from ordinary travelers. They set out at the new moon, accompanied by a small group of volunteers who had chosen to risk everything for the slim chance of victory. Among them was Jengo's birth father, not Kwame, but a young warrior named Sekub, who had loved Amara with a pure heart before fate had torn them apart. He had spent 7 years searching for the woman who had borne his children, never knowing that 3 of them had survived the attempt on their lives. His reunion with his family was bittersweet, tempered by the knowledge that they might all die in the darkness beneath the desert sands. The desert tested them in ways that went beyond mere physical endurance. The children's emerging powers grew stronger, but also more dangerous. Zuberi's connection to the earth allowed him to find water in impossible places, but it also meant he could feel the demon's corruption seeping up through the very bedrock. Tao's mastery of shadows made him an invaluable scout, but the darkness that lived in this place whispered to him constantly, trying to turn his gift against his own family. Kessie's ability to walk on wind kept them moving when the sandstorms would have buried them, but the evil presence in the air made each breath a struggle against despair. Jengo, smallest and seemingly weakest, proved to be their anchor. Her pure heart and unwavering faith in her family served as a beacon that guided them through the worst of the desert's tricks and traps. After days of travel that felt like years, they crested a final dune and looked down upon a sight that defied comprehension. The lost city of Timbaru lay spread before them, its architecture a fusion of every civilization that had ever flourished in Africa. Massive pyramids stood alongside delicate minarets, while intricate palace complexes connected by soaring bridges created a skyline that seemed to reach toward the heavens themselves. But this marvel of ancient engineering was now nothing more than a beautiful corpse. Every building was carved from black stone that seemed to absorb light, and the air above the city shimmered with heat mirages that took the forms of screaming faces. This had been the greatest city in the world, a center of learning and trade where scholars from every nation came to study the mysteries of existence. But its people had grown proud and complacent, forgetting that their prosperity was built upon maintaining the songs that kept ancient evils locked away. When MALAIKA had first stirred in its prison centuries ago, the corruption had found fertile ground in hearts already turned towards selfishness and cruelty. Within a single night, the entire population had been transformed into something that was neither living nor dead, their souls devoured, their bodies continuing to walk and speak, but hollow inside as empty vessels. As the family approached the city gates, they could see movement in the shadows between buildings. The former inhabitants still walked their familiar paths, still went through the motions of their daily routines, but their eyes were empty wells of darkness, and their voices spoke only words of despair and accusation. These hollow ones could not be fought with conventional weapons, for they were not truly alive, but they could drain hope from the living with just a touch. The only path to the demon's prison lay through the heart of this city of the damned, and every step would bring them closer to losing their own souls to the spreading corruption. At the city's center stood a temple complex that dwarfed even the greatest pyramids of Egypt, its obsidian spires reaching toward the sky like grasping claws. This was the Temple of Eternal Silence, built over the entrance to the caverns where MALAIKA lay imprisoned. But guarding the final gate was a figure that made even the ancient warriors in their party step back in recognition and fear. Sekhmet the Destroyer, lioness goddess of war and protector of Ma'at, paced before the temple entrance in her full divine majesty. Her mane flowed like liquid fire, her eyes burned with the fury of righteous judgment, and her very presence made the air itself seem to catch flame. But this was not Sekhmet as the ancient stories remembered her. Centuries of proximity to the demon's prison had corrupted even her divine nature. Her righteous fury had curdled into blind rage. Her protective instincts had become paranoid aggression, and her sacred duty to test heroes had transformed into a desire to destroy any who dared approach her domain. She had become exactly what the demon needed, a guardian so fierce that none could pass, ensuring that its prison would remain unvisited until the binding songs were finally forgotten completely. When she spoke, her voice carried the rumble of earthquakes and the roar of wildfire consuming forests. "Turn back, little singers," she commanded, her gaze fixed upon the 4 children whose pure hearts blazed like torches in her divine sight. "Turn back before I am forced to add your bones to the countless others who litter this sacred ground. The thing that sleeps below must not be disturbed, and if preventing its awakening requires your deaths, then death you shall have." But Jengo, smallest of the family, but carrying within her the fearless heart of her ancestors, stepped forward and began to sing, not a song of power or binding, but a simple lullaby that her mother had sung to comfort her in the darkest nights. The melody was so pure and innocent that even the corrupted goddess paused, and for just a moment Sekhmet remembered what she had been before the darkness touched her heart. What followed was not a battle, but a healing. Though healing achieved through conflict so intense, it threatened to tear apart the very fabric of reality. Amara joined her daughter's lullaby with harmonies that spoke of love transcending death, while the 3 boys added their voices in a chord that resonated with the deepest foundations of the earth. Their song was not meant to defeat Sekhmet, but to remind her of who she truly was. Not a monster driven by corruption, but a protector whose love for the innocent had been twisted into something ugly by proximity to absolute evil. The goddess fought against the healing with the fury of someone whose pain ran so deep that they feared letting go of it. Her roars shattered the obsidian spires of the temple. Her claws carved trenches in stone that had been laid before the first pyramid rose in Egypt. But with each note of the family's song, cracks began to appear in the shell of corruption that had encased her divine heart for so many centuries. Through those cracks leaked light, not the harsh illumination of the desert sun, but the warm, golden radiance of justice tempered by compassion. The moment of transformation came when Sekhmet's rage finally broke against the absolute certainty of the family's love for each other. Seeing the lengths they would go to protect one another, seeing their willingness to risk everything for the sake of strangers they had never met, the goddess remembered why she had taken up her post in the first place. Her corruption burned away like morning mist before the rising sun, and she stood revealed in her true form, terrible still, but terrible in the way that a lightning storm is terrible, beautiful and dangerous, but ultimately a force for balance and renewal. "Pass, children of the ancient songs," she said, her voice now carrying the warmth of a mother's blessing. "Pass and sing the darkness back into its cage. But know that what lies below will test not just your voices, but your very souls, and even success may cost you everything you hold dear." The entrance to the demon's prison was a circular shaft that plunged straight down into the earth's heart, its walls carved with warning symbols in languages that predated human speech. No stairs or ladders provided means of descent. The ancient builders had never intended for anyone to voluntarily enter this place. But Casey's mastery of wind magic allowed him to create currents that carried his family gently downward, past layer after layer of protective wards and binding circles that grew stronger and more complex the deeper they went. The temperature rose with each level of their descent until the air itself seemed thick enough to cut with a knife. Strange phosphorescent fungi provided an eerie green illumination that revealed walls covered in murals depicting the demon's original rampage across the world. These were not mere artistic representations, but actual memories crystallized in stone, scenes of cities consumed by living shadows, of heroes whose courage had been turned to despair by a single glance from Malaika's eyes, of the desperate final battle where the greatest singers of the age had sacrificed themselves to create the prison that now trembled on the edge of collapse. As they approached the deepest level, The children began to feel the demon's attention turning toward them like the gaze of some impossible predator. Their jade amulets, gifts from Baba Tembo that had protected them throughout their journey, began to crack under the pressure of that malevolent regard. Amara felt her hard-won confidence wavering as whispers in her mind spoke of all her failures as a mother, all the ways she had let her children down, all the reasons why she was unworthy to bear such a burden. The demon's power was not merely destructive, but corrosive, eating away at the very foundations of hope and self-worth that made heroism possible. Only by holding tight to each other, by remembering the love that had brought them through every trial, could they continue their descent into the heart of absolute darkness. The final chamber was vast beyond comprehension, its ceiling lost in shadows that seemed to move with malevolent purpose. At its center lay a lake of liquid darkness that reflected no light, its surface so perfectly still it might have been polished obsidian. But the most terrifying thing about this place was not what could be seen, but what could be heard, or rather, what could not be heard. The silence here was so complete, it had weight and substance, pressing against the mind like a living thing. It was the silence of the grave, of dreams that would never be fulfilled, of all the songs that would never be sung if the demons succeeded in breaking free. Suspended above the lake in chains of crystallized starlight hung the prison itself, a sphere of translucent crystal that pulsed with sickly light like a diseased heart. Inside, barely visible through the clouded walls of its cage, something moved with liquid grace. MALAIKA the Soul-Eater was beautiful in the way that poison flowers are beautiful, its form shifting constantly between shapes that human minds struggled to process. Sometimes it appeared as a figure of impossible perfection, sometimes as a writhing mass of tentacles and eyes, sometimes as nothing more than a shadow cast by light that had never existed. The demon's voice, when it finally spoke, did not come through the air but whispered directly into their minds with words that tasted of ash and despair. "So," it purred, with the satisfaction of a spider greeting flies in its web, "the little singers have come to renew my chains." How touching, how utterly pointless. Its laughter was the sound of children crying in empty houses, of mothers weeping over graves that held no bodies. Look around you, children of clay and sorrow. See the bones of those who came before you, heroes all, singers of great renown. They too believed their love could triumph over the inevitable darkness. They too sang their binding songs with hearts full of hope. And where are they now? Where are their precious songs? Nothing but dust and silence, as all things must be. As the family joined hands around the lake of darkness, preparing to begin the binding song that would either save the world or witness its destruction, Malaika's assault on their minds intensified. The demon showed them visions of what would happen to their bodies once the singing began, how their flesh would age decades in moments, how their bones would turn to dust, even as their voices continued to ring out across the chamber. It showed them images of the surface world continuing on without them, eventually forgetting their sacrifice, as humans always forgot the prices paid for their peace and prosperity. But it was when the demon tried to turn them against each other that its true cruelty became apparent. It whispered to Zuberi that his siblings were weaker than him, that he could survive the binding if he simply let them carry more of the burden. It told Tao that his leopard spirit cared only for self-preservation, that loyalty to family was a foolish sentiment that would only get him killed. It showed Casey visions of himself flying free above the desert, while his family's bones molded in this accursed place. Most cruelly of all, it suggested to little Django that her mother had never really loved her, that she was just another burden that Amara had been forced to carry. The children's responses to these temptations revealed the true depth of their character. Zuberi's connection to the earth spirit gave him strength, but his greatest power came from knowing that he was the shield that protected those smaller than himself. Tao's leopard nature made him swift and solitary, but his human heart had learned that some things were worth standing and fighting for rather than running away. Kessie could indeed fly above any earthly trouble, but he had discovered that being grounded by love was a gift rather than a burden. And Django, youngest and seemingly most vulnerable, possessed a clarity of vision that cut through the demon's lies like sunlight-piercing storm clouds. "You're scared," she told Malaika with the devastating honesty of childhood. "You're scared because you know our song is stronger than your silence. You're scared because love is the one thing you can never understand or defeat." Her words rang through the chamber with such truth that even the demon's crystalline prison began to resonate in harmony. If you're loving this epic tale, please subscribe, comment below, and share this video. Tell us in the comments if you want to see part 3 of this incredible story.